Let's see. My name's Tom Ankland. I work at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in Northern California, and what I have is a presentation to talk a little bit about some research that we've been doing on inertial fusion energy at Lawrence Livermore, and in particular how we might translate some of the physics work that's going on at the laboratory into a potential source of practical electrical energy in the future. Now what I'm going to do is, after talking with my colleague Manolo this morning, he was saying that some of you may not yet be that familiar with the concept of laser-driven fusion. So what I'm going to attempt to do is to take material from two presentations, one of which is a more introductory presentation. For those of you who are already very familiar with, yes, that is. Those of you who are already very familiar with laser-driven fusion, this is a good time to take a short nap. And if at a minimum, and then I'll go and I'll show a little bit more detailed technical results from recent experiments that have been going on. So at a minimum, it should be entertaining to watch me try to juggle two presentations. Okay, so in the way of introduction, let me introduce first the concept of laser fusion energy. So the idea is that unlike magnetic fusion energy, where you're using a magnetic field to confine a plasma and harvest energy from it, in inertial fusion energy, what we're really trying to do in its very simplest form is we're trying to create essentially a miniature star on Earth. But when I say miniature, I mean very miniature. I mean maybe a few tens of microns in diameter, so something about the diameter of a human hair. And it only lasts for a very, very short period of time, only a few billionths of a second. But there's sufficient energy that comes out that if you do this repetitively, you can actually develop a practical energy source. So this is what the fuel looks like. You have what's actually a small can. You can see the scale is about 2 centimeters. And we refer to this as the holoram, which maybe will become clear as we go on. And inside the holoram, you suspend a fuel capsule, and the fuel capsule is about 2 millimeters in diameter. So it's about the size of a peppercorn, right? And within that fuel capsule, the fuel capsule is generally made out of plastic or high-density carbon. And inside the fuel capsule is a mixture of deuterium and tritium, right, two isotopes of hydrogen. And that's the fuel. That's the fusion fuel. And generally, it's a very small amount of fuel. It's only about a milligram or so of fuel in one of these capsules. So if you notice, the holoram has openings at the top and the bottom. So the laser, we call it laser fusion, the laser beams come in to the top and the bottom of this can, heat the inside of the can, the inside of the can gets very hot, actually a few million degrees Kelvin, which is sufficient to drive an implosion of that target to heat and compress the fuel to the point where you can get fusion. So again, there's our fuel capsule, the gold can. Inside is the actual capsule that contains the fuel. The fuel is in there as a solid layer. It's actually frozen deuterium and tritium, so this is at cryogenic temperatures. It's suspended using basically a plastic web. Okay, the laser beam comes in. You can see the time scale on the side. Heats the inside of the can up to a few million degrees. At that temperature, the inside of the can actually glows X-rays. And the X-rays are absorbed in the wall of that plastic capsule, or what we sometimes refer to as the ablator. The X-ray field is so intense, it causes the outside of that capsule to evaporate at a very high speed. That reaction force creates like a rocket force and drives the compression of the fuel. And the idea is it heats that compression, heats the fuel to several hundred million degrees Kelvin, and raises the pressure to about 300 billion atmospheres. So very, very intense conditions. So that's the basic idea. Now, this is what one of these capsules actually looks like in reality. You can see it's very small. It contains, one of the fuel capsules, as I mentioned, contains about a milligram of deuterium and tritium. If you put this into a fusion power plant, which has a gain of, let's say a fusion gain of maybe 60, you can harvest about 40 kilowatt hours of thermal energy out of that pellet. So there's various ways to do this calculation, but if you work it out, what it comes out is that you only need about a gram of fuel per person per year for their entire energy needs. So this is why fusion energy has always been, in some ways the holy grail or the ultimate energy source. And you tend to get equivalencies that look like this, where if you take heavy water, which is where you actually extract the deuterium from natural water, if you took a liter of heavy water, it has an energy equivalence of something of a few million gallons of gasoline. Okay, so I'm going to talk now briefly about the laser. To get these kind of extreme conditions, it's not a normal laser, of course. So we're located at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. It's a little bit to the east of San Francisco. The laser is in the building that's in the lower right-hand corner of the photo. If we zoom in on that, it's a large building. It was commissioned in year 2009. If you were to lay out soccer fields on the top of that building, you could actually fit 3 soccer fields on the top of the building. If you were to peel off the roof, you'll see that it's basically filled with lasers. I don't know how well this will translate, but our laboratory is Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, LLNL, and sometimes it's referred to as lasers, nothing but lasers. Right? And this is sort of true in this case. So if you look at those 2 corridors that have the long kind of rectangular tubes in them, those are essentially lasers. And there's no one laser that can produce the kind of energy that's required to drive the fusion reaction. So there's actually 192 separate laser beams. And they're fired and coordinated in such a way that they all converge on that target that I showed you at the same time. This is photographs, gives you an idea of the scale of the system. So each one of those rectangular tubes contains 4 laser beams. Each of the beams, before you go through a focus, is about 40 centimeters by 40 centimeters, so something about that big. So very different than a laser pointer like this. This is the target chamber that was when it was being installed in the building. When I talk later about a power plant, the analysis that we've done shows that you would need a fusion chamber roughly on the same scale as this in a power plant. This shows it installed. The rectangular ducts or tubes that come in at the top and the bottom of the chamber is where the laser comes in. There's 4 laser beams that comes in each one of those tubes. This is a look inside the fusion chamber. If you'll notice, there's kind of a circle right in the center of the chamber, more or less in the center of the chamber, and you can see that very, very tiny object that's inside that circle. That's the fuel capsule. So if you think about that enormous building, actually completely filled with lasers, the idea is all the laser light that's produced in that building, its job is to basically be focused to the inside of that little can that you see in that picture. So this is an animation that shows you how the laser works. This is a countdown. We let this guy think he's counting down. It's actually the computer that's doing the countdown. But. Okay. So this shows you. I apologize for the music. I'm not a big fan of it, but there is a musical thing that goes along with this. This shows where the laser starts. It actually starts with a small fiber laser, similar to a communications laser, and so it starts at the nanojoule level. It then goes through a preamplification stage that has a gain of about 10 to the 9th. So there's about a billion increase in the energy level of the beam. It leaves the preamplifier and now goes into the main amplifier or the power amplifier, where it picks up about another 10 to the 6th in energy as it goes back and forth. And you can see it's a cavity configuration. It actually bounces back and forth a number of times, increasing in energy. So it's an amplifier that has a gain of 10 to the 15th, which is kind of an interesting thing. So now the laser beam is moving towards the fusion chamber. And you can see it's in a rectangular pattern. It's in rectangular coordinates. We now go into something called the switch yard, where you convert that rectangular array into a sphere or to a cylindrical coordinates. You come in, although it looked like everything was out of sync, it isn't really. At the last instant, you change it from infrared light to ultraviolet light, and the reason you do that is you get more efficient coupling of the energy into the fuel capsule. And now we just repeat the same sequence that we showed in the earlier video. The laser heats the inside of the can. it starts to emit X-rays. The X-rays are absorbed by the ablator on the capsule, evaporates quickly, compresses, heats the fuel, and if all goes well, it burns. So this is kind of what it looks like. This is some data. This is actually an X-ray image. So this is looking at the X-rays that are emitted by the hotspot of the burning fuel, and you can see the human hair that shows you generally the scale of this. So you've now compressed that 2 millimeter capsule down to this size and raised its temperature and fuel, and you can see the X-ray emission from this. So let's see what I think might make sense is to just run through this part of the presentation very quickly, and then we can switch over. And for those of you who already are somewhat aficionados of this area, I can show you some current results if we have the time. Okay, so I mentioned we have a study going on that we're looking at if we could take if we're successful in demonstrating net energy gain in the physics experiments that I just described that are ongoing, and hopefully I'll have a few minutes to status where we are on those. The idea is can we translate that into a practical energy source? And to do that, there's a number of factors involved, right? It's not just technology, there's economics, there are business considerations, and so on. And what we really wanted to do is we took the position, let's try to challenge a common perception that fusion is really just too far off to be relevant. So can we do something other than the standard? So this illustrates the concept. And so instead of shooting one of these, a day or every few days, you can see, if you see from the top, you're now injecting the fuel capsules at a few hundred meters per second into a fusion chamber that would be about the same size as the one that's in NIF. So now you do this repetitively, referred to as an engine, and you can kind of see the analogy. So in this case, the laser actually has to track the fuel pellet and correctly time and hit and ignite the pellet. So the energy comes off as X-rays and neutrons, and those the X-rays are absorbed in the first wall that's facing the plasma, and it's cooled by liquid lithium in this design concept. And then the blanket sits behind that, which is something that's about a meter or so in thickness, also cooled by liquid lithium, and that's where the neutrons are absorbed. And it's just absorbed as heat energy. It's carried off to a steam generator, you boil water, you turn a turbine. So for all of the high tech that's involved here, we're really just boiling water and turning a turbine. So this is kind of how it pencils out if you actually look at it as a practical energy source. If you can build a laser that is roughly the same size as the NIF laser, although we can make it much more compact now because we can take advantage of semiconductor technology and semiconductor lasers. We can